Welcome everyone to today's UW-Madison Division of Extension Farm Ready Research Farm Management Friday program. I'm Tricia Wagner, Outreach Program Manager for our Extension Farm Management Program. I'm joined today by Extension specialists and educators to discuss the topic of agriculture pricing, leasing, and contracts, where we will hear landowners and renters negotiate a farm lease and dive into details of specific types of agriculture contracts. I'll now introduce Katie Wantoch. She is the Dunn County Extension Educator. She's going to begin today's session with negotiating details of a lease agreement. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia, and welcome everyone. As Tricia said, Tricia is our Farm Management Program Manager. Not introduce herself, but we are happy to have you join us today as we talk about agriculture pricing, leasing, and contracts. And so what does that look like? Well, it might look like this. It's a little grained picture, but oftentimes we rarely see this sign out in there, but leases do play an important role here in our state of Wisconsin for over 22,600 farms. Yet many farm landlords and tenants alike are unfamiliar with the components of a lease and that landlord-tenant relationship. And that's really what we want to try and highlight here over the next hour with you, is how to make that relationship a strong one and one that you both are agreeable on both sides. So according to our U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA Census of Agriculture, the amount of rented land in farms each year continues to rise, with 1.5% increase in our state of Wisconsin from 2012 to 2017. Farmers, of course, lease almost 35% of land in Wisconsin farms, which is almost 5 million of the 14 million acres in 2017. So what does a lease look like? A lease really is a legally enforceable contract that allows the owner of real estate or personal property, you can have leases for farm equipment or livestock, to really convey the right to use that property to a person or business for a designated period of time in return for some type of payment. That could be cash, it could be, in lieu of cash or something else. A lease only provides the right to use or possess the property, unlike the outright sale of property that transfers title ownership or gives an equity interest in that property. So today we're going to have a little bit of a scenario. Now, we are over Zoom and it is online, so we can't do this role play in person, but we did enlist some help. And so during our dialogue today between a landlord and tenant, a landowner, the landlord, and the farmer who's going to be the tenant, we're going to have you consider a couple different things. Now, this landowner and farmer, they're going to be talking about 80 acres that the landowner owns. The lease is set to expire at the end of the year, and the farmer also rents other farmland in the area. So we have two different videos. One is an initial meeting, an initial conversation, and then another kind of follow-up meeting. So keep these things in mind as you're watching these videos. What things went right for that landowner, that landlord's perspective? What things went right for the prospective tenant, the farmer? And what things were missed during the dialogue that may need some more conversation and more consideration? We'll have a little bit of discussion as we move into our next scenarios. And please enjoy. Our first video is the initial conversation between, again, a landowner and the farmer.
Hi, Jerry.
How you doing, Mark?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for coming by, Jerry. Great weather we're having this late in fall.
Oh, yeah. It's been quite a fall and got all our crops in, so things are looking pretty good for this next year.
Yeah, I'm glad you could stop by to talk potentially about renting my farm next year.
Yeah, I'm kind of with this last year. We've had a good crop and decent prices, so I'm in a better position to be able to, look at adding additional acres. And driving by the property, I noticed that you've always had well-kept land and good place to farm.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it costs for new equipment these days. Back when I was still farming, I focused really more on conservation than profits. My current renter doesn't seem to share my philosophy in this area. I see your equipment driving by my farm on the way to some other rented land you must have in this area.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to view some of your nice rolling hills and been able to look at potentially your current varieties only planted corn and soybeans, and it just seems like these hills could probably use some different crop rotation.
Yeah, I've tried to talk to him about adding a third crop into his rotation, or at least adding a cover crop in the fall after he's done harvesting. He tells me he just doesn't want to pay the additional cost for the cover crop seed and the termination next spring. He only plants corn, soybean rotation, and doesn't want to mess around with other crops. What do you have in your crop rotation?
Well, it all depends where the fields are located, but for the most part, we've tried to look at grow alfalfa and then some corn for chopping and for the beef cattle. But then on some fields, we do have a rotation of corn and soybean, and have been planted corn and seeded down a grass mixture within some of the other land just for baling for the beef herd.
Yeah, I think my land is really better suited for perennial crops like grass hay rather than a corn soybean rotation. I used to bale and pasture this land when I had cattle, and I just sort of felt, that was a nice way to go, sort of historically held on to my production values.
It's always nice to have some hooves on the landscape. I always thought that added a little bit extra to the diversity of the land. But I remember when you had a nice herd of dairy cows, and I think you even showed cattle at one time, didn't you, or the family?
Yeah, my younger daughter did, and I've always sort of thought you're a fine young man, and that's why I wanted to see what you were doing. I want to make sure that my land is well taken care of for my kids when that time for that to transpire transpires.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to know the things that are important to you, Mark, and I just want to have a good relationship with landlords if there's a possibility that we could manage the land in concert with their goals. And do you know what your soil fertility rates are or any of those types of agronomic conditions?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure what it's been since the neighbor started renting about 5 years ago. He doesn't tell me a lot, even though I do ask.
Sure. Well, then it'd be okay, I think, if we could pull some soil tests on the land and look at those nutrient levels. Anytime I rent land, that's kind of the baseline I like to look at. I do have a nutrient management plan that I adhere to, and try to just maintain and improve that level of fertility on the farmland, and I would do the same thing in your case. I do use conservation tillage and am using a more continuous no-till as I transition some more acres, but it takes a few years for me to fine-tune no-till on some of those newer acres.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Weed control can be a challenge in no-till management systems, I hear.
Yeah, we've been working on a herbicide resistance plan, so we try to use the chemistries that allow us to avoid that issue as long as possible, and so I could work with you on any weed control issues or concerns that you have.
Yeah, I never thought to ask my neighbor about that. That would be nice to have done around here. But I need some money to pay for my bills, property taxes. I don't want to rely on my kids to support me with for retirement income. How much are you paying for rent right now, if I may ask?
Well, after I have the soil test back, I'll have a better idea if there's extra fertilizer needed. This would be an additional cost, obviously, so that's kind of where we would fine-tune maybe what that rent would be at this time. I can call the local extension office to kind of get that average county rate, and we can look at it from that standpoint of from an average, and then adjust it accordingly from there.
Okay, Jerry. How long a lease would you be thinking about? I was sort of leaning towards 1-year leases, but if soil fertility levels need to be increased, I could see that you might want to extend that into a multi-year lease potentially.
Yeah, multi-year leases work best, especially when we're trying to work from a conservation practice, no-till soil health type of thing. It can be much more effective to have that long-term contract from that standpoint. And, I have copies of the lease agreement that we could use with some of the other landowners that I can bring along next time. I like to have things in writing, so there's an understanding on both sides here that we can make sure we both agree to what we're going to do.
I can appreciate that. How often do you take time out of your busy schedule to visit with landowners that you rent from?
I try to do it twice a year. I try to visit with them before and after harvest to make sure nothing has changed or with the lease agreement. I also try to talk to some landowners during the year too, especially if something unexpected comes up from a pest management, weather issues, those kind of things. So you're welcome to call me anytime with questions.
Well, that's good to know. I've really enjoyed visiting with you today. Go ahead and pull those soil tests. When you have the results back, stop in and we can settle on a rental rate and work on getting the lease agreement fine-tuned and signed.
Sure do that. Yep. Look forward to working with you, Mark.
All right, don't want to not give credit to our wonderful actors here in the video. So, thank you, everyone. Oh. So now that was our first video. Not all situations, of course, can be this ideal, but we had fantastic actors, fellow colleagues here within Extension that were well versed in ideal situations and resources. But as we transition to our second video, when the landowner and the farmer meet again, just want you to kind of jot down in your brain or write down on paper what things you think went well from the landowner's perspective, that landowner, who in this case was Mark, and what things maybe went right for the tenant, that farmer's perspective. And what did you feel was missed in that initial conversation? Now, again, that initial conversation was quite in depth. When you're initially meeting, especially with a new landowner, or you are the landowner with a new farmer, you might not go into all those details. You might have initial conversation over the phone, those kind of things, but just kind of keep that in mind. Our next video that we're going to go into now, we'll look at a follow-up to their conversation and sitting down again at the table and talking about what to do next.
Hi, Jerry.
Hey, Mark.
Nice to meet you and
Yeah.
have you stop over
Yeah.
and visit with Lisa and I.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Jerry.
Jerry. On the
Good to
road.
see ya.
Yeah, I haven't seen you for a while since you left the show ring. Well, I was just stopping by to see if you give it any thought about possibly renting your land and some of the things we had talked about earlier.
Yeah, I appreciate your taking the time. It's sort of a tough decision for me to make. You know, I've had this renter for several years, and he might not pay me quite as much as what other folks are getting, but he does plow my snow every winter, and I really love that bushel of sweet corn he brings me around the 4th of July. Doesn't that stuff taste great?
It does.
Well, is there certain, I mean, those are things we can sure talk about if that helps with the potential of renting your land. I did get the soil test results back, and it looks like for alfalfa, especially being the most demanding crop, it's a little low on the lime and the pH, so it's going to need some lime, and the potassium levels are a little low too.
That shouldn't terribly impact rental rate, should it?
Well, I think for the first year it could, because I got to put more inputs in to get the pH, and then to get the pH up to where I want to grow some alfalfa, and then that's where we're going to end up. You know, I'd like to at least recoup that investment than being just maybe a 1-year lease, because that pH and that lime is going to be an effect I'd like to see in there for, you know, at least 3 years.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty reasonable, I guess.
Dad, you said you wanted a shorter lease after the last tenant. You were pretty adamant about that.
Well, Jerry is maybe gonna offer us some things that we didn't have access to the last time.
So what about conservation practices? You said you didn't want continuous corn on beans.
Oh, I understand. This has got to be a give and take situation, and I appreciate your input, and I certainly appreciate your time and input. Tell me a little bit more about, you know, you're wanting to fortify the soil base and raise alfalfa. What are you going to take into account as far as ongoing crop rotations? What kind of practices do you utilize?
Yeah, so, yeah, I understand that there's a conversion that would occur here if you're used to seeing that more diverse crop rotation. I do grow corn and soybeans where it's applicable, but I do have a small beef herd, so that's where we do plant alfalfa. So that's where we can put that alfalfa on maybe some of the more highly erodible lands or where there could be erosion issues, and then maybe where it's least or less conducive to some soil erosion, we would stick to the corn and soybean. But usually coming out of alfalfa, I'll try to no-till. That seems to be the easiest. It's easier weed control, and it's a little bit easier for planting, and follow that with corn to take some of the nutrient credit. So I try to manage my nutrient management plan around crediting and a little bit of manure from the beef herd. And so it's mainly those three crops. And there again, like I said, with alfalfa, I'd like that minimum of 3, preferably 5 years, to make sure that I get the benefit of having alfalfa in that rotation.
Okay. Yeah, those are all good points. I'm just a little bit unsettled as to what the best absolute plan that we could follow or should follow might be. Do you have any other thoughts, Lissa?
Yes, how much are you looking to rent for, Jerry?
Well, looking at some of the statewide average, there's publications that some surveys have been done, and so that state average is 133 an acre. So that could be a starting point. And for the first couple of years, maybe that's where it's a little less than that, or whatever. I don't know what your old renter was going for, but we would maybe use that as a starting point, and then we could back up maybe from there, or drop it a little bit, because I've got a lot of inputs to put in this first year or two, especially with lime and trying to get the potassium levels back up. And then maybe we could revisit it in an agreement that we could ratchet it up a little bit if needed, based on the length of the contract.
And do you believe that this could all be factored into a lease? And with that, what kind of payment schedule would you be looking at on this?
I would prefer a monthly payment. So you'd get either a direct deposit or some kind of monthly payment versus all of it or half of it at the front of the growing season or at the end of the growing season. It's easier for me to balance out my budget a little bit easier if it's if I know what I'm taking out each month versus everything at the beginning or the end of the season.
So what happens if you have a shortfall? Say you have a couple months in the spring where you have a lot of inputs, what happens then?
Well, that's going to be on me to budget for that. And so my desire is for that to be, that payment is good, but I would hope that there's an understanding that if there is a shortfall, we can catch that up maybe at the harvest season. But my intent would be to spread out my costs throughout the year, rather than having all of that rent at the beginning or the end of the harvest season, or the beginning of the planting season or the end of the harvest season.
Okay. Well, I think this may call for a bit more family conversation, but appreciate your laying out your philosophy on land rental and giving us some talking points for Lissa and I to run through. And maybe down the road a piece we can get back together and take this to the next level. Sure appreciate it, Jerry.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Nice to meet you again,
Thanks
Lissa.
for stopping in.
I wanted to just thank our extension colleagues in the Chippewa Valley for acting in those 2 videos. Now, of course, maybe not necessarily ideal. We'd all love to have our negotiating for our lease agreements go that smoothly. But a lot of times they do not. That was kind of more the best case scenario. But it is definitely one example. So, certainly there was some things that went really well for the landowner's perspective. You know, they certainly talked about different things that was a priority. I think in the farmer's daughter came in on that second conversation to remind the landowner about, you know, some things that he really wanted and were important to him. But then there's some things that also went right for the tenant. I think the tenant, you know, really talked about maybe having that reduced rental rate, especially if it's going to be a multi-year lease, needing to put some additional lime on to increase that pH for alfalfa. So there's a lot of things that we can unpack in that conversation. But today, if you don't find the resources as we go through our the remaining half hour, 45 minutes here, hour of our conversation, here is our website. Lots of information and resources here, farms.extension.wisc, or feel free to use your internet browser to just type in farms and UW extension. You'll find information that was referenced throughout those videos about what you should know about farm leases, what are the rental rates. We have the National Ag Statistical Services rental rates for each county in Wisconsin, and that is there, as well as trying to find equitable leases. But now we're going to go kind of into more about tools and considerations to make sure that both parties are happy in the end. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues Stephanie Pasture and Caitlin Davis, and they are going to let you know how to negotiate a nice, robust, and fair farmland lease agreement. Thank you.
So much, Katie. Okay, so we are going to talk very briefly about the art of negotiation. So these are general tips that work well in all types of negotiation, not just these land lease negotiations. And they are also the same tips and strategies that many salesmen and equipment dealers are taught during their training, so they may sound very familiar to folks. We've separated these negotiation stages into 4. So we'll talk about preparation for the negotiation, opening the negotiation, bargaining, and then closing the deal. So with that, once again, I'm Steph Pasture. I am the ag educator at Nozaki and Washington counties, and I will turn it over to Caitlin Davis, who will start us off.
Thanks, Steph. I'm Caitlin Davis from La Crosse County, and I am pleased to be here. And there we go. All right, so everything is negotiable. Whether or not the negotiation is easy is another thing. Like beginning a conversation, maybe with a stranger, or even having some of those tough conversations with family members, it can seem a little daunting and overwhelming. In this presentation, we'll go over those steps needed to help you navigate negotiation. Before we really dive in though, I want to share a few other quotes about negotiation with you. The best move you can make in negotiation is to think of an incentive the other person hasn't even thought of and then meet it. By Eli Broad. He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation. By Chris Voss. And during a negotiation, it would be wise not to take anything personally. If you leave personalities out of it, you'll be able to see opportunities more objectively. Brian Koslow. So we'll take a look at, some of those quotes, think about those quotes as we go along and talking about this process. So things that we'd like you to take back to the barn with you. So those kind of main objectives, what are those takeaways coming out of this? So negotiation is a critical business skill which all farmers would do well to learn. Becoming a successful negotiator takes time, practice, and confidence. Opportunities for negotiation, those will range from negotiating land leases to employee salaries and work schedules to purchase contracts, customer communications, and even family chores. At the end of the negotiation conversation, you want to be able to walk away with something you feel good about. At the end of this presentation, we hope these are things that you can bring back to the barn with you. So let's take a look at an official definition of negotiation, a process of looking for a solution between two or more parties with differing views. Let me rephrase that just a little bit. Really what this means is sometimes you're starting as competitors with different views, then eventually walking away with an agreement and being on the same page. So it's very interesting. I really enjoy this definition of negotiation because really you are two different people coming together to have a common goal. So what is worth negotiating? So not everything should be negotiated. If you did that, it would be a very, very long conversation, probably taking multiple days to complete. By knowing what you want and asking for what you need, this can help streamline the conversation and make negotiations go easier. Part of negotiations is being willing to understand the other party's wants and needs and coming to an agreement. Sometimes that's looking at several outcomes that would work for both you and the other party. This is where we explore the limits of negotiation and why some things are just not worth the time and effort. So there is a cost. So negotiations aren't free. Usually it's in the areas of time and money, and these are honestly our two scarcest resources in most businesses. So before entering a negotiation, make sure your investment in the outcome is worth what you're willing to invest into it. Now, the big question we talked about before, whether or not everything should be negotiated or, is even it worth negotiating? So negotiation takes planning, preparation, and time. It uses some of those scarcest resources, as I mentioned before. Also know that a successful negotiation will very often cost you something. So when we talk about that cost, it's not just money, but it's also that social capital, that political capital. So be prepared to pay a price for what you want. So those maybes for negotiation. Questions to ask yourself: do you have the passion for movement on the issue? Is there room for improvement? Will it give you confidence? Is this situation out of balance and negotiation could help to equal things out? Is there very little to lose and a lot to gain? Then yes, maybe it is time to negotiate. On the other hand, maybe not. Maybe it's not worth the investment of that social capital, that political capital, or even money. It could potentially increase that social vulnerability. Maybe you stand to lose your business, or you could potentially lose a trusted partnership. Maybe it's not worth negotiating if it's not going to produce change. If there's not an opportunity for growth, then this could limit your wants and needs. There may be too much to lose and very little to gain if you do negotiate. And so negotiations always come with a cost to both parties. So if the outcome is not worth the investment, then it may not be a good use of time. Also, the outcome of any negotiation can be unpredictable. If you're not prepared to end up in a potentially weaker position, then think carefully about proceeding. So let's talk a little bit about that first one, which is preparation. So know what you want before you go in. Again, negotiations aren't free. What will it cost you? Understand that you won't walk away from it free. So focus on that win-win. So where can you find those wins, those positive outcomes? This goes back to, again, to know what you want and ask for what you need. If you assume something that you want is non-negotiable, it could make the conversation more difficult, especially if it doesn't lead to one of the multiple satisfactory outcomes. Don't sell yourself short. If the outcome isn't something that's going to work for your needs, you don't have to agree. That's where you need to know where to draw the line. One of the hardest things to do is to walk away from a deal that's not good enough. There are many social and cultural factors that play into that difficulty. And honestly, sometimes it feels like the path of least resistance to just cave in and take the offer because it's better than nothing. That is a really good idea and can set the stage for future disappointment. Before you start, you should know your target price or walk away price. Be prepared with research market data to support your price stance. We saw this when the farmer was talking to the land tenant about why he was thinking for the rental rate that he did in the video. When you say to yourself, I will walk if I can't conclude a deal that is satisfactory, the other side can tell that you mean business. Understanding your needs and the other parties. If you know what the other party needs as well, this can help you find common ground in which to base your negotiation on. So that opening. So again, that big scary, moment of, all right, the negotiation's going to happen. So how do I pull this off? Honestly, you have 7 seconds to make an impression. Nail that first impression in those first 7 seconds and finish positively. People don't remember things how they happen. They don't remember events chronologically. If you think back to some of the conversations you've had, you probably only really remember that first 7 seconds and that very ending piece. It takes 7 seconds to make an impression to make sure it's a positive one. By understanding the other party's needs, it can help to build those relationships and find common ground. Display that you have prepared in advance with research to back what you're negotiating. We saw this in the video where the farmer had data to back up why he suggested the price he did for the land rental. And then the Oprah rule. So we discussed setting a good rapport in the beginning, but just like this quote says, no matter what, you need to make sure people feel well treated and well regarded all the time, but especially at the end. So at the end, having that positive feeling and you both walking away with a good feeling about the outcome, even if it's not you're finished the negotiations, is important. So leaving in a positive manner will aid in future negotiations with the other party. No matter what, you need to make sure, like I said, that people are feeling that positivity at the end of the conversation. So even if the negotiation doesn't fall through, you still want to leave that positive impact in case you want to have those negotiations in the future. I will now turn things over to Steph.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. So our next step in the negotiation process is that bargaining. So this is the meat of the negotiation, or the back and forth, the give and take, and where the deal is done. So negotiation, it's just like riding a bike. It's a learned skill. You're not going to be maybe great at it the first time. You just have to start somewhere and you get better with practicing. So one of the important things to do is to focus on that goal or what you want to get out of the negotiation. You want to understand your shared interests, build on those for mutual gain. We saw a lot of that in the conversation in those YouTube videos earlier. Build on that mutual gain, because that's where your trust and your common ground is built. And then you want to be an active listener. So using those skills, showing people that you're actually trying to understand what they're saying, where they're coming from, that you're not just kind of listening, go the wah, and then ready to jump in with your response. So some active listening skills, using those open-ended questions, asking them deeply to kind of tell them why they want what they're asking for, why it's important to them, and digging a little bit deeper. And then engaging with discomfort. We know negotiation is uncomfortable, especially if you're just getting started. It helps to just acknowledge that, and that allows you to move past it. So engage with that discomfort, and then express your feelings without showing anxiety or anger. This is a really important too. Making sure, like Caitlin talked about, to monitor for positive body language and vocal tone that can really move you forward in that negotiation. So negotiations, they don't work very well when one person does all the talking or controls the situation. Really make sure that you listen to understand for those key issues and those hot button issues that your negotiating partner is expressing. So top tip here. Silence is a really useful tool, and this can be very challenging for folks. Especially if you're like myself. I come from a big Italian family. We talk fast and we talk nonstop, but silence can be very important. So try to become really comfortable with silence. It's important for you because it helps you with calming and pacing, especially if the conversation starts to get a little heated, you're not getting what you want, or the person you're negotiating with is really trying to dig in and push your buttons. Just pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. It allows time for you to process, and it allows time for them to process. That's really important too, because there are some folks that just need that extra quiet space to think and reflect on what the conversation's been about. Not everyone can instantly think of a response or instantly know what they want after something's been over. silence also creates this opportunity for the folks that you're talking to become uncomfortable because so many people aren't comfortable with silence. So that does kind of put it back on them too, to kind of get them thinking, oh, I've got to talk, I've got to fill, I've got to make an offer. So really use silence as that calming, pacing, and that tool of discomfort to help move the negotiation along. And then Caitlin mentioned this too. I love it, RESPECT. I hope everyone got that song stuck in their head because it got stuck in my head every time I look at the slide. What you want to do is really focus on respect all the way through that conversation. Separate the people from the problem. And this can be very hard to do. I know we can get out there, we get our fingers going and doing the pointing, but really make sure that you're addressing the issue that you're negotiating and not the person that you're negotiating with. So you want to follow respect by acknowledging the other party, agreeing with them when appropriate. You're not going to always be butting heads. You are going to agree on some things. So agree when appropriate, recognize and affirm what they're saying and what they're asking, and let them know you're listening. And you can do that again by asking follow-up questions, by pointing out the things that they've said that you agree with or that you don't agree with, but make sure to let them know that you are listening throughout this whole process. And don't let the negotiation ruin the relationship. Whether or not you accept and you part on mutually agreeable terms, or you both decide to walk away, you want to make sure to maintain that relationship, because relationships are really important. You may need to work with this person again. So always make sure to carry that respect all the way through the conversation. So some other strategies we have for success: come prepared with a backup plan or an alternative that you see as fair. Be open to listen to the other party's alternatives. And like Caitlin mentioned earlier, do your research on every area and all the alternatives that might be out there before agreeing to go through with them. You want to focus on that common ground. So a fundamental tool of negotiation is to begin at that point where you have agreement. So that creates that common ground, it builds that trust. There might be times when you start to go off in different directions, and that's a cue to bring the conversation back to the point at which you agree on in that common ground, and then you can start exploring other options from there. Keep it respectful, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, trust your gut and believe it. Don't take that bait, don't let them needle you into anything, remain calm, avoid emotional outbursts. Take that break. It's totally acceptable to walk away. We saw that in the video where the landowner said, okay, I think we need to think about this separately and come back. You can also ask for a restroom break, ask for 5 minutes, grab a glass of water or coffee, take a break if needed, come back and regroup. And then capture the value. And that value is in that give and take. So making sure that you're not trying to overpower and just get everything you want. You can really get a lot of value out of that back and forth. So quickly, common roadblocks to avoid: do not negotiate against yourself. That means when you have made an offer and the person rejects it, don't come back right away and offer something else. Let them counter offer. Don't negotiate against yourself. So that counter offer is really important because that gives you something to work with. Negotiate only with the person that makes the decisions. If that person does not have the power to seal the deal, they might not be the right person to be talking to. Ignore those negative tactics. Don't fall for the hurry up and sign. Avoid buyer's remorse. So that means celebrate your wins. Don't agree to something and then immediately regret it or think you could have done better. Celebrate your wins. And then again, don't fall for the buy. It's great for you in the business. You know that. You don't necessarily need to have someone tell you that. And beware of that great gift or something that looks really great, but there's some hidden not great things in the middle. So closing the deal, we want to make sure to make it easy to say yes. Build upon those interests and ideas. Work with them, again, that values in the give and take. Bring them to their senses, not to their knees. You want to maintain that relationship, and you don't want someone really upset with the outcome. And then this is a really key. If you remember anything on the slide, ask them to explain their thoughts and intended consequences of their ask. This is a very, very, very powerful tool. Ask them to explain the consequences of what they're asking you. Sometimes that can really reset the whole negotiation. And then at the end, always put it in writing so you can come back and refer to, yep, here's what we both agreed to. And when you get to yes, stop talking. Never negotiate against yourself. So when you're wrapping up, after you've come to an agreement or you've decided to part ways, reaffirm that relationship, and on a positive note, focus on the future. Thank them for their time and let them know you look forward to working with them again. Even if it's not true, make sure to reinforce and end on a positive note. In summary, do your homework, know your bottom line, build and maintain those relationships, spend more time listening than talking, and take care of you and make sure you get what you need. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, we know this was a very brief run through of some negotiation tips and strategies. Let Caitlin or I know, or visit our farms.extension.wis.edu website for more tips on negotiations. Now we are going to move into our breakout room. So you are going to have the option to choose which of these rooms you would like to be in and learn more about. We have leasing buildings and facilities, flexible versus cash leases, pasture leases, and then small acreage, high value, long-term leases. So you should have a screen pop up in front of you asking you to join or select your breakout room. Please do that now, and we will have about a 15-minute discussion in our breakout room before coming back to the main session together to ask questions.